Okay, so this is Critical Disability Studies at Manchester Metropolitan University. We're very happy today to have Professor Carolyn Kagan from the same university. And Carolyn, I'd like to ask you a number of things about your work as a community psychologist. So the first question is, why does disability studies need community psychology?
Well, so I suppose there's something in that about whether disability studies needs any academic discipline, but let's assume that it needs an academic discipline. What might community psychology offer, I think, is a grounding in a value base, and the value base that we describe is one of social justice and of access to societal resources, and those are often denied to disabled people and their families, a value of community and the importance of connection, and different kinds of connections and everything that people get from a sense of belonging and with other people, and a value of stewardship, and that's about looking after the world and its resources, including its human resources, and valuing people for all the varied contributions they can make and not just those that are defined by an able-bodied world. So that would be the first thing, a value base. I think the second thing would be a broad understanding of human experience that embraces both individual experience but also social and organisational and societal experiences. So from community psychology, we don't take individual experience as separate and isolated from the context in which people are living. And for disability studies, those contexts vary so enormously. And one of the things that community psychology can offer, I think, is a challenge to Anglo-centric or the North American domination of psychological knowledge and, well, indeed all social scientific knowledge that is imposed upon disabled people. So, for example, the kinds of challenges and issues facing families of disabled people living in the slums of Kolkata in India will be quite different from the challenges facing families and disabled people in the wealthy parts of the United Kingdom. And community psychology can offer some analytic tools for trying to understand those different types of experiences and the priorities that disabled people and their families might have from those different contexts and how to work with them. The second, I can't remember whether I'm up to second or third thing is about plurality of method. And there'll be some community psychologists who will emphasise social constructivist and qualitative methods. My own approach and over the years has been a plurality of methods. So, for example, if we were trying to do something about social stigma, we might need to be doing opinion surveys.
Right.
That's not usually seen as a more emancipatory end of psychological research, but it might be really important to try and understand and prioritise where interventions to change social attitudes and stigma might be best placed. Now that's quite in contrast, and I would never support the kinds of abusive methods that social psychology as a discipline addressing, say, the same issues of social attitudes and social stigma employs. So, for example, there is an experimental paradigm in social psychology around contact theory, which says if you have contact with people, you're no longer prejudiced or stigmatise them. Well, what a revelation! But the experimental demonstration of that is to set disabled people up, or people who are potentially the objects of prejudice or stigma, as objects, as a variable in an experimental study. And I think that kind of study is abusive. But beyond that, I think the plurality of methods is justified. The defining criterion for choosing methods or bits of psychological knowledge to be using for any particular project or issue will be how do we best advance the interests of disabled people and their families in a liberatory way of thinking, but sometimes it might be that we need to use some of the tools of the dominant power interests in order to get some kind of movement.
What I'm hearing here is a lot around the context and around the person, around politics, around community. But I think for some of our viewers, the worry would be the psychology word. And as I know you have written about, psychology and disability have a kind of long abusive relationship, on the part of disability, on the part of psychology on disabled people. So what would you say to people who are worried about the word psychology in your approach to working alongside disabled people?
I think probably there's a difference in the understanding of psychology within the discipline of psychology and the way that psychology is used societally.
Right.
And if psychology is the study of human experience, which is one way of defining it, that's not necessarily the way that psychology is used in terms of its the practices and the interventions that are used, particularly within medical services,
right,
to reduce people to different internal psychological processes.
Right.
So I don't think there's an easy answer, and I don't think there's a quick answer, because I think there will always be, from our perspective as academics, we have the luxury of debating all these fine distinctions between what's the meaning of the word psychology, understanding the way in which that psychological contribution is used socially,
right,
and societally will always be different. But I don't think that that's any different. I don't know whether it's any different from other professional practices that only attend to one aspect of the person. So, for example, physiotherapy. Take somebody who needs constant physiotherapy for drainage of lungs, and in order to survive. Not constant physiotherapy, daily physiotherapy. Now that might be a really useful survival tool, but that physiotherapist is only thinking lungs.
Yeah.
And isn't thinking holistically, isn't thinking about whether the environment is exacerbating people's lungs, isn't mounting a campaign for clean air, or in the context of some of the work I've done in India, of clean water and sewage washing through people's houses and how that might be affecting their lung problems. So all of these professional interests partition off within a medical model different parts of the person. And I think psychology does the same.
Yeah.
Psychology as a discipline and psychological thinking doesn't have to be seen like that.
Right.
So that's where I think community psychology might offer a different way of thinking of the person. But I don't want to kind of overemphasize this, because I don't want to defend the indefensible.